All right. Good evening. This is my fourth YouTube live. I want to thank everybody for joining me. In this live, I want to talk about three main topics. Um, the January 6th hearings, since what happened on January 6th, 2021, uh, the presidential election where Biden was elected and supporters of Trump challenged um, the counting of the electoral votes. Then I want to talk about the meaning of the January 6th hearing. And when you look at the transcript, what the transcript is really saying, I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about the DC premiere of the film African Redemption about Marcus Garvey, which I was able to write a review of. This review came out in September when the filmmakers Roy T. Anderson and Allison Anderson premiered it in New York. And I just was late today because I was talking with Roy Anderson, getting his response from the welcome. And he said the feedback was awesome. So I'm grateful for that. And so that topic I want to talk about, as well as, let's see, a few other topics. There we go. An amazing comment that I really want to unpack that had to do with how Roy Anderson and Allison Anderson showed Marcus Garvey's last part of his life in that film, and the importance and everything I'm trying to do with my work. So I encourage you, please like, subscribe, and share. I see we already have one myself. So just make sure you go out there, make sure you comment, make sure like, and make sure you subscribe. Make sure you comment, make sure you like, and make sure you subscribe. So I'm glad to be here on this fourth YouTube Live. I wanted to look at particularly one part of the transcript. So the January 6th hearings took place. Yes, they took place they started last, okay. Let me see this. Let me get my bearings together. Bear with me. There we go. Thank you. So I just wanted to look at a particular part of the hearings. This is a transcript from Benny Thompson of the January 6th hearings that started last week. Benny Thompson said, unlike in 1814, it was domestic enemies of the Constitution who stormed the Capitol and occupied the Capitol, who sought to thwart the will of the people. And he's talking about those who led the January 6th insurrection in 2021. Supporters of Donald Trump, supporters of the president, then President Donald Trump, so they did so at the encouragement of the President of the United States. The President of the United States trying to stop the transfer of power, a precedent that had stood for 220 years, even as our democracy had faced its most difficult test. And I just wanted to look at particularly one part of this I wanted to underline in the transcript, and that's the part that says it was domestic enemies of the Constitution. And I want to put that in context, viewers, with what's taken place in terms of the repression. There's been an increasing level of repression by the left against other left journalists. So the question for me in this transcript becomes, are the domestic enemies just those who protested in support of Donald Trump? Are the domestic enemies of the Constitution only those who supported Donald Trump and wanted him to win the election in 2020, the U.S. presidential election of 2020? No, I say no. There are other domestic enemies, and those enemies are those in the left who suppress other leftists in the name of so-called nationalism. And we see a lot of that happening. We see a lot of repression of independent left journalists. This is nothing new, especially during wartime. At the time the U.S. is giving so much aid to Ukraine, you see an incredible amount of left journalists getting censored, getting their PayPal accounts blocked. They're not unable to raise money because they raise the important questions about how those on the left are actually repressing and how the money they're spending on the war should be better spent on more domestic needs. And so when we talk about, when Benny Thompson says domestic enemies of the Constitution, in my book, they also include those on the left who censor other leftists. This is what the second chapter of my first book was all about. Pauline Hopkins, in a fictional way, showing the difference between a radical point of view and a liberal point of view, and how it was the liberals' duty to police who was radical, almost purge them, eliminate them. And we see the same thing every time a war happens in this country. There's a huge purge. In the 50s, it was McCarthyism, where Joseph McCarthy, whose I think birthday is around this time, just destroyed the careers and ultimately the lives of countless artists because they were perceived to be too left or they were perceived to be communist. We saw McCarthy destroy the life of so many artists, including Hazel Scott, so many friends of Ruby Dee, um, uh, Tony Kushner's play, Angels in America, is all about how Roy Cohn, employed control by J. Edgar Hoover, destroyed the life of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Those to me, though, J. Edgar Hoover essentially behaved as an enemy of the Constitution, but during his life and even after his life, he is made into a star, made into a hero when he used the details of people's sexual life to try and destroy their career. For me, that's enemy behavior. That's behaving as a domestic enemy. So when Benny Thompson says in this part of the January 6th hearing, it was domestic enemies of the US Constitution, enemies are not only staunch supporters of our president, enemies are also those on the left who purge others on the left. And I just want to provide an example of one of the most important news outlets founded by Robert Parry, Consortium News, who broke so many important stories, including the Iran-Contra affair, and who also exposed the fraud Robert Parry's Consortium News did of Russiagate. I'm very grateful for all the fraud that Robert Parry's Consortium News has exposed. He is a friend of the Constitution. He's not an enemy. But during his life and even after he's passed, we see how the US government and the left elements within it, human beings within it, flawed human beings within it, become domestic enemies by absolutely censoring left people in the left. Joe Loria, who is the editor in chief of Consortium News after Robert Parry passed, writes this: Consortium readers know by now that PayPal permanently banned us, Consortium News, without explanation. And NewsGuard has accused us of publishing false content on Ukraine. And nothing was false. All they said simply was that the US supported the toppling of the Democratic leader in the Ukraine in 2014, Viktor Yanukovych. And that leadership is all the reason why any behavior by Russia is exploded as a quote unquote Russian invasion. And so the US, through support, invested so many energy as Joe Biden is choosing to do, rather than provide basic schools, basic needs in this country that are in desperate need of attention. Joe Loria writes, if they succeed, he's talking about PayPal and those elements of the left who behave like domestic enemies. If they succeed, the result would be to damage us with readers who are also our funders. We come out of the establishment and have a combined 2 centuries of experience in mainstream journalism. We are in a position, wielding our own editorial judgment, to criticize both. Okay, to criticize both. And they're stating clear why they should not be attacked by what I believe are domestic enemies of the Constitution, those on the left who are trying to purge any criticism of the US government in a war really that is not necessary, in an invasion of Ukraine that is not necessary, in an invasion that was abetted and aided by a US supported coup of Ukraine that toppled Viktor Yanukovych. If you believe in what we're doing and wanted to continue, Joe Loria writes, despite the efforts to undermine us, please consider making a donation today to our spring fund drive. And that is absolutely from Joe Loria. So I want to just look at that and just when Benny Thompson mentions domestic enemies of the Constitution in the January 6th hearings, I want us to really ask ourselves, to what degree is this country censoring each other for the sake of a military invasion of Ukraine? To what extent is that happening, making us into our own enemies, where we chastise, censor, silence others? And when we silence others, we're really denying that US constitutional right of free speech, to the extent that what Aaron Mate has tweeted about the January 6th hearings comes absolutely true. Aramate said the January 6th hearings, aka the Liz Cheney, who's on the Republican side and bringing witnesses, Democratic Party nominee kickoff show. And for me, in these January 6th hearings, um, a bit overblown for me, especially with all the repression that's going on the left. It's a bit overblown, and people are basically supporting a liberal point of view that only sees the enemies in the United States as those of Donald Trump, and that is absolutely not true. We see that there are those in the left who are choosing to repress others, choosing to repress outlets like Consortium News. And we have to really look at that because, as James Baldwin wrote about Angela Davis, if they come, if they're coming for her at night, they're going to come for us in the morning. So it's just a matter of time before our rights get taken away when we see our fellow sister, our fellow brother have their rights taken away. And so I want to look at it this time in terms of somebody having their rights taken away because of their political beliefs, Marcus Garvey. And this past Saturday, yesterday, in fact, there was the DC Caribbean Film Festival. And at 5:15 yesterday, the DC premiere, I live in DC, so I was aware of this. I did see the film already in September, and I did write a review of this amazing film. Journalists like Joe Loria, like Robert Perry, like Aaron Mate, like Nico House, like Sabby Sabs. I want to shout out my left journalists who are of color and who tell the truth and who defend the Constitution and who talk against those enemies, domestic enemies of the Constitution, who censor other journalists when this country is doing wrong, when we're making the wrong choices, when we could have chosen diplomacy instead of bombs. Okay, this is a journalist who spoke the truth regardless of the threat of imprisonment, who endured the prison bars. And there are scenes. I appreciate this film for so many reasons. Roy T. Anderson has done an amazing service for humanity in creating a film. If you know nothing about Marcus Garvey, this is a good place to start. However, just like the Hollywood film and just like the Netflix film, it should not be your first and last source of information about Garvey. Pick up a book, get the get the Marcus Garvey Library. Buy all the books by Tony Martin, read them, and when you're in a zen place to understand what's being written, understand it. Read for understanding. Until then, though, you are given an amazing work of art by Allison Anderson and her husband, Roy T. Anderson, who produced this amazing film. Uh, it had its DC premiere yesterday, and at AFI Silver Theater, which was the same place I saw Andre Gaines's film on Dick Gregory. So many reasons this film should be seen, discussed, aspects of it. You see a lot of what well, there are two elements. The skeleton of the film is in two parts. You have a narration, as you can see in this flyer, is by Keith David, the amazing actor who I remember from the stage play Nativity with Felicia Rashad and Stephanie Mills that was produced by James Stovall. That's where I first heard Keith David. And that's when his voice resonated in my head. He does the narration. There are also dramatizations, and I'm a dramatist, so I was able to appreciate the truth of all the dramatizations and maybe except the last one. And I'll explain what I mean by the last dramatization. But by the way, make sure you see this film because it is having another screening on Tuesday. And if you want to know more information about that screening, make sure you go to Marcus Garvey movie. Make sure you go to Marcus Garvey movie. So I'm grateful for his film. There were certain dramatizations he did, and let me see if I can pull up the particular part. Yes, this is from my review that I wrote in September. So in most of the film, he has Keith David narrate information you don't know. He has a range of important authorities about Marcus Garvey. Mind you, I am publishing a book with Arawak Press about Marcus Garvey, specifically about Tony Martin, who is the historian of the most published historian of the life and work of Marcus Garvey. When I presented at the the African Heritage Studies Association conference in DC, which took place 2019 November here in DC, I mentioned that down the street, the main thoroughfare was 7th Street or yes, 7th Street or what becomes Georgia Avenue if you go northward. Not too far from the place I spoke, which is the Thurgood Marshall Center, are the National Archives. And in the National Archives, Tony Martin did research about Marcus Garvey and found documents, letters from the United Fruit Company lawyers writing to the U.S. State Department about this cantankerous, influential individual writer named Marcus Garvey, who's creating as much problems for the United Fruit Company as they said Toussaint Louverture. So the State Department was already very clear. But the angle that Tony Martin is saying that this lawyer is writing with is definitely an angle that was trying to make an enemy about of the U.S. government official he was writing to, because he was appealing to them basically to send U.S. forces to neutralize or to stop what Garvey was doing. So we see that energy, and we thank Tony Martin for showing us the importance of perspective, showing us the importance of perspective and what it means to be an enemy of the U.S. Constitution. When you're an enemy, you're not one who is helping people mentally liberate their minds. And that's what Garvey was all about. He was just showing citizens their rights and what they were capable of doing by demonstrating independent business ownership. However, he was deemed an enemy. The real enemy were those who were trying to censor Marcus Garvey. So in this part of the review, the first full sentence says, the actor playing Garvey, this is about, I'm writing about the very, very last dramatization of the film called African Redemption. And I write, the actor playing Garvey opens his eyes in bug-eyed fashion, then faints and feigns death. Several works by and about Garvey revealed this myth. You know, certain myths are true, others are not. Like what Benny Thompson was saying about the insurrection being produced by enemies of the Constitution. Yes and no, and that's not only who our domestic enemies are. Enemies also include those on the left with the money and the power to literally cancel or shut down other outlets because of the specific views they present. I write here, it is not likely that Garvey actually got a stroke or heart attack reading headlines about him, as he was aware of the hostility of Robert Abbott, who was publisher of the Chicago Defender, towards his organization while he was in America. Like his editor turned spy, Hubert Harrison, and Jeffrey Perry wrote a 2-volume biography of Hubert Harrison, Robert Abbott cooperated with what Garvey called, in the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, the enemy press. So it is unlikely that Garvey would be surprised, much less shocked into a stroke by reading negative headlines by Padmore and Abbott about him. He's used to reading those headlines. He's used to it. But, you know, I understand the drama to create at the end, because it's a popular myth that supposedly reading the headlines precipitated his death. But that was only in somebody's narrative. And it's trying to, again, suggest the success of his enemies, which, as you know, they were paid to do what they do and to pay to make him feel like he hadn't had an impact. But those who study the Garvey movement, like Tony Martin, like Roy Anderson, know that Garvey's ideas and philosophies has had a tremendous impact. But I think it's important, as you watch the film, to be very sensitive to how much hatred Garvey experienced in his life and after his life up to today in 2022. The dramatization of Garvey dying, I write, the dramatization of Garvey dying does raise the reality of hostility towards Garvey and the Garvey movement. A woman who passed since the film was released, who Roy Anderson interviewed, Mariamne Samad, said that her whole world exploded. And she's also in Stanley Nelson's film, who looks at Garvey from a totally different perspective than how Roy Anderson looks at him. Perspective is important. Again, Tony Martin taught me that. And if you ever hear his interviews with him on what inspired him to write the Marcus Garvey Library, he was in a library in London and read Black Moses by Cronon. E. David Cronon is the author, and he was mortified at how much hatred it sounded like Cronon wrote about Garvey with. It's clear Cronon really hated, and Tony Martin knew then there needed to be some balance. And so Tony Martin's Marcus Garvey Library provided that balance. And Roy T. Anderson and Allison Anderson. I never want to forget the work of the two of them, of him and his wife, Allison Anderson, produced this amazing film that provides the necessary balance that we need about Marcus Garvey. Mariamne Samad said that her whole world exploded when Garvey died, and that she was going to make sure that his words didn't die. His words didn't die. And for me, what motivates me to learn about Garvey was how hated he was, and how much, because of that hatred, I still, in my conventional schooling, am taught to dismiss him. Yes, and I'm very interested in that. Even in my literary imagination, I question that. And so that's why this play came out of me, my fifth play about his first wife, because you really got a glimpse into the significance of his work and the impact and the influence of it. So this particular part that I have now, speaking of works to provide that necessary balance against the hatred that we've all been taught to have against Garvey. This is a excerpt of a book, this book, Marcus Garvey by Rupert Lewis. What both Tony Martin and Rupert Lewis do is to provide the historical context behind the hatred of Garvey. And this Garvey was a figure with, and this is the conclusion of, you need to read really this book because it shows the difficulty in civic life, and trying to make a difference. And I think about Kanye too. Because, and I saw a post recently that I had screenshotted of him being very clear about how a lot of liberals, the same liberals that censor other liberals, do not want a strong Black male father. And I think that is true. And you see how even today, more so than conservatives, liberals have a deep-seated hatred of Garvey. Western liberals, and I'm like, why? I don't understand. Yeah, I really don't understand, but I take a logical, reasoned step back from their obvious hatred, and I measure it on my scale because I'm a Libra, and I understand it, and I put everything in context. Rupert Lewis writes here, Garvey was a figure with undoubted national appeal, and no one can tell the course Jamaican politics would have taken had he continued to function politically in the land of his birth. And he's writing this after, Garvey had to leave because of how the wealthy class succeeded in expelling him. For several of the leading UNIA members, including Amy Jacques Garvey herself, were identified with the predominantly middle-class-led People's National Party, which carried a social democratic program. Amy Jacques Garvey maintained good relations with PNP leaders who were interested in the question of African liberation. Furthermore, she actively campaigned for Norman Manley in 1944. And I want to say that Amy Ashwood Garvey was staunchly against Norman Manley winning. Amy Jacques Garvey was for him. For despite his judgment against Garvey in the matter of his municipal council seat in 1930, Manley later subsidized the New Negro Voice. What Tony Martin writes is that Manley was very much against Garvey himself, and also writes in his biography of Amy Ashwood Garvey that Amy Ashwood helped get Garvey arrested um, with the help of the then lawyer Norman Manley. So protean had been Garvey's activities, broadly based in his movement, that his influence was felt in Africa. That's been documented here. The United States and the Caribbean. Garvey's legacy is essentially one of a fight against racism and colonialism, particularly his experience in civic life. That's what really interests me, how in civic life he was highly despised, and obstacles were created. Um, the last sentence that I underline here is his determination, his optimism, intellectual abilities, and oratorical skills constitute a legacy from which fighters against racism and neo-colonialism of other generations can draw upon. And you can only draw upon it if you know about it. And you know about it beginning with the film, but please don't let your study of Garvey begin and end with this film. There is the Marcus Garvey Library. And I'm turning back now to get a book from it. Hopefully I don't make my other books topless. This is a nice biography, small biography. It's not that long, called Marcus Garvey Hero. You can start with. You can start with if you don't know any books. I mentioned this book because it's one of the few books that's printed that talks about the difficulty in Jamaica civic life that Garvey had. And then who also provide names and details is again Rupert Lewis. So begin with these books to understand and read more and get a more balanced view of Marcus Garvey. Um, the filmmaker was telling me, I know you didn't show up to the DC film screening because there were other people there. And I said, yes, I don't want to be in a position where I feel like I'm contributing, because I've seen a lot of other YouTube channels, and there are a few channels I follow and happily subscribe to. And some of them is just like a bunch of black men fighting each other. And that's why when I saw this particular post by the former Olympic gold medalist, he has that gold medal for life, and he worked and he earned it. Somebody who I really appreciate, who put in a lot of hard work, is Aries Merritt. Aries Merritt earned the Olympic gold medal in the men's 100 meters at the London Olympics. I'll never forget that. Jason Richardson, I believe, came in second, earned the silver, and then Hansel Parchment earned the bronze. Hansel Parchment, almost a decade later, 9 years later, would earn a gold medal in that same event against the U.S. hopeful Grant Holloway. But I'm so glad Aries, has shown the world what it takes to earn that gold medal, what it takes to earn that national record. He's an incredible athlete, and I just liked what he commented here on this particular post. I follow him on IG, and I happened to peruse, and I saw this comment. He said, "I am a black man. I build." Right. We're not tearing down each other. And I'm also saying this in regards to how the West got and paid so many people to destroy Garvey's character, to destroy Garvey's life. I published a book review in the Journal of Caribbean History in December on Hubert Harrison and how he was paid by the US government to tell them everything going on in Garvey's organization and to eventually get Garvey arrested. We shouldn't tear, as a black man, I should not tear another black man down. And that's why I love this post by Aries Merritt. He says here, I am a black man. I build. I don't tear down other black men. I have felt the pain of being torn down. And see, when you feel that pain, you can't do that to someone. There's no real price. Because now, once you can say, I'm not going to tear down another black man, you can question whoever's paying you to do it and say, if you can pay me, why don't you change what the black man is saying is wrong, rather than paying me to attack him? So this is a powerful part of his comment here. This was from June 5th last year, and we just passed June 5th this year. Today is the 12th, the birthday of Barbara Harris. And yesterday, this past week, was the birthday of Kanye West. Wow. And Hazel Scott, who was affected by enemies of the Constitution, who got her fired for her political views, please. But regardless of where we are, we cannot tear down another person. Aries Merritt says here clearly, I have felt the pain of being torn down, and I've decided I will be deliberate about building others. If I didn't tag you, please don't be offended. I tried to pick people I thought would do this challenge. Okay, I don't know what challenge he's talking about, but this part of the comment really soothed my soul as I was just like scrolling through my phone and reading IG. This part really spoke to me. So thank you, Aries Merritt, for for posting this, that we don't tear anybody else down. All too often, he says, we men find it easier to criticize each other instead of building each other up. With all the negativity going around, let's do something positive. Star. Upload one picture of yourself, only you, then tag as many brothers to do the same. Let's build ourselves up instead of tearing ourselves down. I rarely post photos of myself. I always like to post photos with other people because I don't like the individualism. We're not individual. We're like in a community. But it's a nice challenge. But thank you, Aries Merritt, for commenting this because we need to spend more time building each other up. I've reached my half an hour limit, and I thank you for indulging me. Please, if you appreciated what I had to share, if you agree that domestic enemies of the Constitution are not simply only Trump supporters because they're Trump supporters, but people on the left who want to censor other people or police other people's thoughts when those thoughts are trying to bring liberation and not uh, constriction. If you care about that, like, if you care, subscribe. If you care, share my YouTube live. All right. Thank you. God bless you. Have a great week.